we're going to go ahead and let Dr. Nathan MacPherson, because he could be making a lot of money in the private sector. Instead, he's going around the state doing these symposiums with me. All right, and so I really, really want to welcome Nathan MacPherson here to this occasion.
Thank you. So, first question, of course, why are we here? We've answered why all of you are here. These are the questions you all wanted answered today, and any that haven't been covered, make sure I answer for you or Representative Reinbold at the end. A little bit of background why I am here, spending my time this afternoon speaking to you rather than with my family. I'm second generation tax and constitutional defense attorney, and so I'm following in my father's legacy as well as my mother's legacy. My mother has an elementary education degree. Her parents were public school teachers. Her grandparents were public school teachers. And when I was born, my mom fought the infiltration of the Arizona school system. They flew in administrators from Chicago to take over the conservative Arizona school system. So I'm following in my parents' legacy for the protection, obviously, of my family, my wife and kids who are running around the library as we speak here. And of course, because I took an oath before God to defend the Constitution against all enemies, public and private, and as you'll see today, this is violating that Constitution. And ultimately, why does the Constitution matter? Well, the purpose of the Constitution, why are we here today, is to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We have a lot of children in the room today, and we were all born into what we at least believe to be a free country. I don't think anybody here today would rather live in another country, otherwise you'd be there. I have permanent residency in Europe. I could live in Europe if I want to. It's not as free, even though it's supposedly free. I live there, I work there, it's not as free. Our Constitution guarantees us freedom, and we're here to defend that. And if you saw me speak at Anchorage, you might remember, I'll have you answer the question, what am I holding in my hand here? Bottle of water. And why do I have this bottle of water? Do I want plastic? So what if I would pour it down on the ground, just have the water? It wouldn't be very useful, right? So why do we need this plastic? It provides the structure to hold the water, right? Why do we need the Constitution? It provides the structure for our government. And in fact, if we didn't have a Constitution, would we have a government? No. And why did we elect Representative Reinbold, the governor, the senators, anybody? What's their job?
Represent us.
Represent you? In what respect? Declaration of Independence says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, right? So our elected officials are there to secure our rights. So if our rights are being violated, they're not securing those rights, and we need to hold them accountable, right? Well, as we've mentioned already, the Common Core violates the U.S. and the Alaska Constitution, violates federal statutes and Alaska statutes, including the statute Representative Reinbold got passed prohibiting expenditures on. Not only violates the constitutions and the laws, but it subverts our very constitutions, turning us into something other than a constitutional republic, and usurps our parental rights and state sovereignty. So we've heard a lot about parental rights, something people are concerned with here. Well, that's being usurped. Again, why does the Constitution matter? Because it holds us together, right? And one of the important things in the Constitution, the 10th Amendment, which Representative Reinbold mentioned earlier, that anything that we don't give, remember, we hold these rights. That's in the Declaration of Independence. All 13 colonies agreed unanimously that our Creator has given us rights. We're sovereign. We're giving up some rights to the state under the state constitution. A lot more rights that and responsibilities we give up to the state than the federal government. And in the U.S. Constitution, we give up just certain enumerated ones to the federal government. The 10th Amendment says whatever we didn't give to them is reserved for the states. And that sphere, the two spheres there, federal government and state government, are there for a reason the Supreme Court has said to protect us from tyranny. And what's happening right now? Did anybody in here vote in the Common Core, including Representative Reinbold in the state, any of her colleagues? It came from the federal government, actually even from the United Nations, as we'll have to see. Certainly not from us. Anybody here want the Common Core still? How about the Alaska standards that are aligned to the Common Core? Anybody? Even you? Maybe the proponent?
Oh, no, I'm not a proponent, but I do believe if you're taking public education money, that you are giving up certain freedoms to the government to start dictating standards and quality control. So you have to be very careful in a public education system how you balance the public interest and the private interest. There's got to be something. Whether or not this is it is up for debate. I'm not personally a fan, but anyway.
It's interesting. Thank you for your comment.
Except that the government is us. We
So-
are the government.
That's true, but
That's a very
we're co-opting
valid
our education to someone else, therefore we're giving them control.
No,
How
we're
much
their
control?
bosses.
That's true.
People forget that.
Well,
To whom are we giving the control when we have public government, public education?
That's exactly it.
So to
Follow
whom?
money.
That's the question.
Oh, yeah.
Are we giving it to the United Nations?
Depends on who's elected. Unfortunately,
Should we be giving it? Are we deciding to give it to them?
no, we should not. That's why.
Washington, D.C.?
We elect the federal government, and we do give them, we have a federal, education is being dictated partially federally.
Should it be though? Is it
No,
legal?
it should be
That's
state and
correct.
local.
State or local. So
That's
federal
true.
statutes say this, that the parents, and we'll be getting into this, so thank you for these comments. I'm glad that you're here. Violating all of these, so you see here, let's see, the 1965, we have 2 federal statutes on public education, and in 1979, the Department of Education Act that implemented the U.S. Department of Education under President Carter. All 3 of those federal statutes, they're in 20 United States Code, unanimously state that the ultimate role for education lies with the parents, that the states must support the parents in education, and that the federal government has a very, very, very limited role to support the states in supporting the parents, and that the federal government may not dictate anything respecting standards, assessments, curriculum, prohibited by federal statute, even if, we go beyond the mere fact that it's not one of the enumerated powers given to the federal government under the Constitution, and it's questionable even whether the U.S. Department of Education is constitutional, but we don't even need to go there because it's clear the federal statutes and congressional intent. So when you pass a statute, there are a lot of debates that go on. So U.S. Congress debated these, and especially in 1979, or leading up to the 1979 passage of the Department of Education Act, there were debates in U.S. Congress, unanimous, that the federal government may not control standards, curriculum, assessments. Period. The end. Not even a question. Well, under the 10th Amendment, even as interpreted by the U.S. Supreme Court, because federal law prohibits the federal government from dictating these things, because the Constitution has not given the federal government authority over this issue, the federal government may not tie money to states implementing this, which is exactly what's going on here under the ISEA Elementary and Secondary Education Act waivers. And again, that's the statute from 1965 that then gets amended from time to time, including under the American Investment Recovery Act, whatever that was, in 2009, where they said, okay, we're going to give the states this money if they basically do the Common Core. And there's a lawsuit right now by Governor Jindal suing the U.S. Department of Education, saying, hey, you said the only way we can get the money is by effectively doing Common Core, even though it doesn't say in the law Common Core, practically speaking, it is the Common Core. Thomas Jefferson agreed, President, founding father, that the Constitution doesn't grant any authority for the federal government to dictate education. It's unanimous, no question. Well, what they're doing, of course, is tying the money. If you want this Department of Education money from the federal government, states, if you want our money, you have to do what we say, and that means adopt the Common Core. And this guy, anybody remember the switch in time that saved 9 Supreme Court under Supreme Court, like they did in this case, was ruling in favor of the Constitution against the federal executive at the time, FDR. And he said, I'm tired of this. I'm trying to get things passed here, and you're blocking me from violating the Constitution. I'm going to appoint a lot more justices to the Supreme Court and dilute you guys if you don't do what I say. This justice was the one who switched his vote on a Supreme Court ruling, went along with all the New Deal type stuff that FDR was doing. And so we still only have 9 Supreme Court justices. But before he did that, we're blessed with this decision in Butler, which was one of the first decisions where the Supreme Court said, if the federal government doesn't have authority to do it, they can't bribe the states to do it. And who can name this guy? Hey, who can name that guy? The one next to me there is Sheriff Mack, family friend, and we have him to thank for the Prince decision. Unfortunately, it's not Mack versus U.S. because Prince was the Montana sheriff who said, I don't think so, Clinton administration. You can't tell me what to do regarding the background checks. Remember back in the 90s, the gun law was passed, the Brady Bill, and said that the local law enforcement had to do the background checks and that you had to wait to get your gun. And Sheriff Mack and Sheriff Prince sued, took it up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, that's right. The federal government can't tell you, local law enforcement, what to do. So because of this decision, we have Supreme Court law that says the federal government may not tell the legislature what to do, and it may also not tell the executive branch of the state what to do. Wait, what's happening with Common Core? Why are we doing Common Core? Because the federal government said, states, you're going to do this, otherwise you're not going to get the money. Well, what if the state says, okay, you can't force us to do it, but we really think Common Core is great, so we want the money, we'll do it anyway. What does that say? Cannot be ratified by the consent of state officials. And this is, again, New York versus United States, U.S. Supreme Court. So is that binding in Alaska, what the U.S. Supreme Court says? Under how we run, yes, it is, right? So the Supreme Court said what? The state of Alaska, Commissioner Hanley, if he really wants the money, he can say, that's okay, we'll take the money and we'll do it. You say federal government? Or he's violating Supreme Court law. Wait a minute. How about any laws passed in violation of this? Are they valid then? If the Supreme Court said you can't do it, and Hanley says we're going to do it anyway, or the governor says we're going to do it anyway, is that valid? So who's breaking the law here and who's not? Interesting.
Okay, so can I ask a question?
Yes. Please.
So why isn't anything being done? So we have all of this, and it's like, it's
$1,000,000
so
question.
crystal clear, and it's like, well, how can they?
So the Supreme Court has an answer to that as well.
Okay.
And when's the last time you ever called President Obama and told him what you thought? When's the last time you called the governor and told him what you thought?
Yeah.
You met with him?
Actually, yeah, I've been writing lots of letters lately.
You hearing back?
Yeah.
You getting dialogue? That's good.
I'm getting letters back. I'm getting form letters back and.
Form letters, okay.
Yeah.
When's the last time you were able to speak with Representative Reinbold face to face?
No.
Right now she's in Juneau, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But sometimes she's in Juneau, right?
Yeah.
When's the last time you were able to talk to your school administrators, if you wanted to? How far away do they live?
Yeah.
How far away is their office? Well, their local school in your community, right? So that's the answer the Supreme Court gives, is things have to be local. That's the whole design of our government, is we have the power. We give up some to the local, some to the state, some to the federal government, but most of the stuff, including education, is very, very, very local. Because you can go talk to your principal and say, you're violating the Constitution, you're violating Supreme Court law. You better not be doing that. If he's hearing from you guys, which happened in Palmer, we had the president and vice president of the Matsu School Board. We had the Matsu Borough, and the parents were there saying, you're violating the law, you're doing something we don't want. They can drive down to the borough building down in Palmer, right?
So I guess what we need to start doing is start appearing at every single board meeting with this.
And I would recommend, because I could ask you, do you think that your local school administrators want to do what's right for your kids, or they want to harm your kids? And most of the people, they want to do what's right. So why aren't they? And how can we help?
I think they feel like their hands are tied.
They feel like their hands, well, that's exactly what they said, our hands are tied. So maybe you can help them to do the right thing, because they want to do the right thing. They feel like their hands are tied, but if you're there with them, their hands aren't tied.
And this is on your website, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And the handouts are
Okay.
here.
Okay.
So, another thing Representative Reinbold mentioned earlier, the money that we're sending to Kansas to test our tests and, under PARC and what's the other one? All these acronyms that we have. Well, that violates the Compacts Clause. There's already been SBAC, is the other one, unconstitutional. And this is a preliminary ruling, but to get a temporary restraining order, which this is a temporary restraining order issued in a case where the parents sued saying our state, Missouri, shouldn't be sending money to these other states because it violates the Constitution. The judge said, you've met the burden of TRO. I think that this very well may be unconstitutional. You've presented enough for me to put a stop to this right now. You're going to have to post a bond, just in case you're wrong, $100. You think the judge was pretty convinced and say that this case is ongoing, so we'll see how it turns out. My reading of the Constitution is pretty clear. If you don't have U.S. congressional approval, states may not enter into agreements. Well, that's exactly what this does.
I have $100.
Oh, you have $100. Well, and that may need to be done. We the people have the right, we have standing to sue for violations of the Constitution. The Supreme Court's clear on that. So, U.S. Secretary of Education, what does he want to do? And this quote was up a little bit earlier. He wants to track Johnny and find out how much he makes later on. So tracking him from cradle to grave, basically. And of course, I'm a tax defense attorney, so I deal with the IRS. What does the commissioner, the current commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, what's he doing? Just collecting your taxes? Is it just about the money? Why do you have to file an information return? What's even your tax? Your 1040 is called what? An information return. You have to put, if you donate to the church and want to deduct that, you have to put what church you're donating to. So they're knowing everything about you. Why? Exchange data. But internal revenue, so they're just exchanging data between the states and the federal government, right? This came out just about a month ago, January 12th. International data exchange. Now remember what Representative Reinbold said, your permanent fund dividend information is linked to your student file. So you have a little kid here who's getting the PFD. They have your kid's social security number, your kid has one. IRS gets that, right, because you get 1099. So your school information is linked to your IRS information, is linked to the international data exchange. Interesting. So why is that? Who's behind the international stuff? Well, this is an official United Nations document available on the United Nations website, talking about no one should be invisible. This is the world that we want, a world that counts. Where even if you live out in Alaska with a physical address, not even a street address, you're not going to be invisible. And they're going to have universal civil registration by 2030. Do you think maybe the federal government is implementing Common Core data tracking pursuant to United Nations treaties? In violation of the U.S. Constitution? Can we pass a treaty that violates the U.S. Constitution? Do you want us to? Religious freedom is another thing Representative Reinbold brought up. And that appears to be violated by the Common Core because it promotes humanism and Islam, and it denigrates Christianity. So it's certainly not neutral. Some people might want it to be neutral. Some people think we should have Christian education. But in any event, the Alaska Constitution prohibits sectarian education. So no matter what anybody wants, we have to follow the Constitution. Non-sectarian education. Well, the Supreme Court has held that for purposes of religious freedom, humanism is a religion. So to teach humanism in a school would be to violate the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, violate Alaska Constitution. And for bonus points, anybody who can name that church? Nilchik. Yep. Very good. So why do we even have public schools? There are a lot of independent homeschoolers here. And by the way, if you want to know how this affects independent homeschoolers and homeschoolers who take the state money, I'll be speaking at the Alaskan Private and Home Educators Association meeting at the end of April on that topic. How does this affect homeschoolers? That'll be in Anchorage. Why do we have public schools to begin with? All this garbage that's going on with the Common Core. Because the Constitution says we have to, right? So why is Representative Reinbold taking up this fight here? Because she recognizes that she took an oath to defend this Constitution. It says that it's her job to establish and maintain a system of public schools. So does that mean that Juneau should be telling us what? That kind of goes to your question, ma'am, or your comment, that certainly anytime, that's what the Supreme Court quote was, anytime you're taking money, it's the power to control you, right? So if you're sending your kids to a public school or doing the taking the idea money, correct, you're giving up certain rights.
Voluntarily.
And the Ninth Circuit even says, well, Alaska's in the federal Ninth Circuit, that anytime your child crosses over the threshold of the schoolhouse door, you no longer have a fundamental right to direct your child's education. So does that mean that Juneau gets to tell your kids what textbook they're going to use? No. Good answer. And then Thomas Jefferson says that it's still to be run by the local. So you have local schools, local school boards. And even Senator Dunleavy, the Senate Chair of Education, he said it should be local. Representative Reinbold, I'm sure agrees, local, as she mentioned that earlier. It's up to us to decide. So even though it's a government school, the state has a duty to establish it. It should be local decisions. The school in Anchorage might be a little different than one in the Matsu, than one in Fairbanks, and one in Nilchik, right? Well, we've determined, anybody think the Common Core or the Alaska standards are constitutional at this point? Commissioner Hanley doing what he's supposed to do under the law? Anybody who's implementing this following the law at this point? No. Okay. Now, subversive of country, what does that mean? Anybody tell me what does it mean to subvert the Constitution? One thing to violate, how is subvert? Undermine. Very good. So, I know Alaskans don't really care too much about guns. Not as much as Californians. But what does the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution say? Well, if you take a Common Core aligned civics class, it means that the Constitution, the piece of paper granted to certain militia members the right to maybe have a gun under certain circumstances. What does the actual U.S. Constitution say?
Shall not be infringed.
Shall not be infringed. What does the Supreme Court of the United States say that the Second Amendment says? As watered down as you might think they are in 2008 and in 2010. They even say it's an individual right, unconnected with service in a militia. So why is a textbook saying one thing and the Supreme Court is saying another thing? Number one, why does the textbook have the actual text of the Second Amendment? Number two, if they want to expand upon that, why don't they take what the Supreme Court in 2008 and 2010 has said? Instead, what does this sound like? Some people, if they're in a militia, might get a gun. Sounds a little bit more like the United Nations Arms Treaty, doesn't it? Well, it's good that the kids at least are learning what the United Nations says, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that everybody has a right to things you and your family need to have a healthy and comfortable life, food, clothing. So anybody in here, clothes you're wearing, like worked and made money and bought the clothes, I don't know why, because you have a right to it. When you go home to your house, the government pays for that, right? That's what the kids are learning in school. This is the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights taught in curriculum. This is from New York State Common Core aligned curriculum. You send your kid to school in New York State, this is what they've passed as curriculum to be aligned with Common Core. And then, of course, the Declaration of Independence, which should be taught, especially in a government school, you think. And there's a bill, right, to have the actual Declaration, Constitution taught in public schools, and that was shot down.
We're fighting it real hard right now. It's in my committee. We've been trying for about 3 weeks to get it out. It's House Bill 30. I'm a co-sponsor with Wes Keller, but more than half of our committee won't let us get it out of our committee because they don't like a few things that were in the Constitution. You know, in the beginning, they got amended, like women's weren't able to vote. And so we can't even get it out of our own committee, and Wes Keller and I are on there. So we're trying to strong-arm Culver to get it out of there. Liz Vasquez, me, Wes Keller, we think we can get it out of committee. We think we can get it passed. But Wes has tried for, I think this is his 6th year, he's tried to get this passed.
Yeah. So we have people who took an oath to defend the Constitution, who don't want the Constitution taught in the Alaska schools because they don't like some of the stuff the Constitution says.
It's been amended.
Well, give us a list of those people.
Stephen is one of them, and Harriet Drummond. They're on my committee right now, and Christ Tompkins, which is in Sitka. And that's what you guys. We all come together from very diverse backgrounds, and we're completely lobbying with people that it's like a suburb of Seattle in Juneau. We are minority of minority of minorities. The conservatives are in Juneau.
So instead of teaching the U.S. Constitution, because state representatives can't agree on that, apparently people can agree on this. So again, the question was, you know, how is this happening? Is this all illegal? I mean, I would say it's treasonous to teach United Nations and not to teach the Constitution. That's the definition of treason, because the Constitution is the document that establishes our government. And of course, so the Declaration of Independence, which we can't teach because it might offend people, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable or unalienable rights. So instead, we'll just give up all of these rights because we don't want to teach the Declaration of Independence. So instead, the United Nations gives us the right to a comfortable living because our Creator can't give us the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yes.
And they have model UN
Yes.
in our high schools.
Correct.
Very, very popular.
Yeah, so we are training our kids rather than how to read the Constitution, follow the Constitution, look at the Supreme Court cases that have said what the Constitution says. Rather than following the rule of law, we teach them to join the United Nations and be little ambassadors, you know, wearing their blue helmets. How did this even, especially in Alaska, I mean, we all ought to be ashamed of ourselves. This is happening of all places here, you know, New York, California, Chicago, you can see. Basically, it's a worldview issue. It goes down to why do we even educate our children? What's the point? You know, they could be playing on the playground or they could be learning something. So why do we send them to school? Why do we spend about $20,000 per child in Alaska for public education, about $2,000 a year for homeschool education on average, and I think it's around, what, about $10,000 or $12,000 for private schools. Interesting that public school costs quite a bit more, but in any event, it's a lot of money, a lot of time. We're all here on a Saturday afternoon talking about education. What's the point of education? So before I take the next slide, like some people in here to answer, why do you send your kids to school, or why do you homeschool? What's the point of this education? Anybody? Nobody knows why you're educating kids?
Prepare your kids for life.
To prepare them for life. Okay, that sounds like a good answer. Yes, ma'am?
To make them productive members of society.
Productive members of society. Okay.
It's our responsibility.
It's our responsibility. That's a very good answer. Yes, ma'am?
Those who control the children control the future. Islam knows this. And Dewey knew this.
Yeah.
But a whole lot of parents who aren't trying to vote in every election that they possibly can don't seem to know this.
Very good. Those who control the minds of the kids control the future. That is exactly right. So there's a dichotomy here. The proponents of the Common Core, you know, those who started it, who funded it, Bill Gates and so forth, those who are writing these laws talking about college and career ready, seem to think that we need to teach our kids what is so-called 21st century skills so that they'll be able to go to college, graduate from college, get a good job, make a lot of money. Anybody here think that the more money you make, if you were a millionaire, you'd be happier than you are if you're a billionaire?
They're usually less happy.
Usually, that's been my experience, yes. I've been around some, global business people, and I tell you, they weren't as happy. My parents even say they were happiest when they were forced, studying in school or whatever. So, that's interesting, because all of these things, the college and career ready, you're getting through college, getting a good job. Arne Duncan's tracking to see how much Johnny made, because apparently if Johnny gets through school, he took these classes and he makes $50,000 a year versus $500,000 a year. That's what's being measured. So I'm assuming Arne Duncan wants him to make $500,000 a year rather than $50,000. Maybe he wants, I don't know. But is anybody here measuring, I hope my kids get really, really rich?
Poverty is pernicious. We don't want to ignore that either. And as long as the government is sponsoring programs to get rid of it, you can't complain when you're aiming at education to make people monetarily successful. That's the litmus, unfortunately.
Yes, we don't want to have poor people, although we always will, I think.
Exactly. You can't eliminate poverty through education.
So we want people to be able to, what did you say again, sir?
I'll just
Prepare them for life, correct. So that no matter what circumstance they're in, they'll be able to pursue their happiness, exactly. To have life, to sustain their life, to have property, and to pursue happiness. So, John Adams, children should be educated, instructed in the principles of liberty. Can you do more if you're free or if you're not free? Free, obviously, right? I mean, look, our country was built on free people. We built the most prosperous and interesting country in the history of the world. So somehow, freedom brought prosperity. Systems of education. Anybody know who Noah Webster was? I think a lot of people in here do. Noah Webster is considered the father of traditional American education, not the John Dewey education, but what we had before that. And he wrote the first American English dictionary that defined rigor in a different way than educators do now. Principles of virtue and liberty and an inviolable attachment to the United Nations. No. Wait a minute. Inviolable attachment to their own country by participating in the model United Nations, learning that all countries are great, they're all the same, one world. No. Their own country. Why? Because the Constitution establishes our own country. And the government, school of all things, needs to defend the Constitution, because without the Constitution, there wouldn't be a government to establish it. So, and once again, liberty, virtue and liberty. And interesting, so does education go hand in hand with freedom? If you're not educated, can you be free? Which is why we have compulsory education, right? Otherwise, liberty can't be equal or universal. If we have varying degrees of education, we're going to have varying degrees of freedom. So compare that or contrast that to U.S. Department of Education. Recovery money, again, remember the Common Core was forced on the states through the Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So saving jobs and how much it's going to advance reform. What kind of reform is that anyway? Reform is all about jobs. We have to educate our way to a better economy. So there's quite a contrast. Education is for liberty, for freedom. Education is for a better economy. It's quite a dichotomy. Social justice also. Does the Constitution guarantee the right to social justice? And this data that we're using to track Johnny and find out, what classes did he take, how much is he making now, it doesn't tell us the whole truth, but it doesn't lie. So next time you're called to the witness stand, and they want you to swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, tell them, I'm not going to tell the whole truth, because I just won't lie. And this data, though, is going to be used to open and close schools around the country. So, what can we do? Patrick Henry is one of my heroes, and he said we have to fight. Of course, we're fighting with words and with our votes, with calling, writing, especially writing the elected officials, helping your local elected officials to follow the law, to recognize what the Constitution says, what the law, what the Supreme Court says, and to do the right things. And we're not alone. Patrick Henry, in his famous speech, said, our Creator's going to raise up friends to fight our battles for us. Look what happened with the Revolutionary War. What's happened just in, all of you showing up here today. And all of us coming from around the state, even flying from around the country with Barbara Haney up in Fairbanks. Friends certainly have been raised up to support Representative Reinbold. Because the bottom line is, was it on your watch that the Republic died? You want that to be your legacy? That I didn't have time, it wasn't, I was distracted. My grandkids are raised in a communist country, hey, at least they'll have United Nations guaranteed them a comfortable life. That's cool. Or are you going to take a stand? Whether we're successful or not, of course, all we have to do is show up, right? So, as Patrick Henry said, may we the people prove ourselves worthy of the name of America. Thank you.
In the Matsu, please follow him at www.beatirs.com. He's got all his slides up on his website for any of you to look at and to use.
And the videos of Palmer, of Anchorage, this video will be up when they're done.
So he's a